This is another incident to prove the history of Usul al-Fiqh, and to prove that the history of Usul al-Fiqh goes back to the time of the companions radiallahu ta'ala anhum. Also, you know, the very famous letter sent by Umar ibn al-Khattab to Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. Abu Musa al-Ash'ari was appointed as the governor and the Qadi of Al-Yemen. And you know his story anyway. Umar ibn al-Khattab sent him a long letter which is known as Kitab Umar ibn al-Khattab li Abi Musa fi al-Qada. In that letter, Umar ibn al-Khattab provided Abu Musa with number of principles of jurisprudence without telling him that these are the principles of jurisprudence, but he indicated to him that these are the principles that you need to use when you want to come up with a particular judgment. Among those principles, he said to him, اعرف الأشباه وقايس الأمور. You need to see and you need to identify the matters that are similar to each other. And if they are similar to each other, you need to give them the same ruling, because by just common sense, if these two incidents are very similar to each other, then they should take the same ruling. Now, Umar ibn al-Khattab radiyallahu ta'ala anhu is teaching Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu ta'ala anhum this principle of jurisprudence. Now, of course, we can give so many examples, but this is very important to understand the history of Usul al-Fiqh. After the time of the Sahaba, the Tabi'in radiyallahu ta'ala anhum, they were using what the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum were using, and they were expanding more on these principles. And there were a number of examples of how the Tabi'in expanded on principles like this, just because of time. Then after the Tabi'in came the time of the Atba' al-Tabi'in. Now, the time of Atba' al-Tabi'in, which is around 150 years after the hijrah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some scholars say that Imam Abu Hanifa radiyallahu ta'ala anhu, who passed away 150 years of hijrah, he was the first one to write a dedicated book in Usul al-Fiqh by gathering some principles that are needed to understand Quran and Sunnah, and to put them in one book. Some other scholars said no, there was Muhammad al-Darir, who collected 17 qaida, 17 rule or principle of Usul al-Fiqh, known as Qawa'id Fiqhiyya, the rules of fiqh, and he listed them in one book. And they said that he is the first one to write in Usul al-Fiqh. Maybe some scholars insist that he was the first one to write in Usul al-Fiqh. Maybe that is true. I don't think that the matter needs that much investigation, because all the scholars from all schools of thoughts admit that Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala is the first one to compile Usul al-Fiqh in a dedicated book, to compile the principles of jurisprudence, all of them in a very holistic way, in a very totalitarian manner, in one single book known as Al-Risala. Now, without getting into much details of the history of Al-Risala, but in this book, this great book Al-Risala, Imam Shafi'i, in the beginning he spoke about the sources of Sharia, Quran and Sunnah mainly. He also proved that the ijma', and this is one of the achievements of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, that the consensus of scholars is a very important source of Usul al-Fiqh. Also, Imam Shafi'i spoke about qiyas, and he put certain guidelines of how qiyas can be used. Also, Imam Shafi'i spoke about al-awamiri wal-nawahi, and Imam Shafi'i refuted al-istihsan, which is concluding certain rulings by just what the scholar thinks, or what he what he sees as the best ruling for this particular incident. Inshallah, we can explain it further. Imam Shafi'i had a number of books in Usul al-Fiqh, okay, like Jima' al-Ilm, also is another book of Usul al-Fiqh. As you know, some scholars said that Al-Risala was written twice. As you know, that Imam Shafi'i moved from from Iraq to Egypt, and when he was in Iraq, he started to write his great book Al-Risala, and then he revised it again in Egypt when he was exposed to a new context in Egypt. And the final form of his book, this great book, Al-Risala, was crystallized in or during his period in Egypt. You know, Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala did not live for a long period of time, but Allah Jalla wa Ala gave much barakah in his life. Imam Shafi'i was born 150 years of Hijrah, and he passed away 204 of Hijrah. Some scholars say that he was born on the day Abu Hanifa radiallahu ta'ala anhu died. Imam Abu Hanifa died in 150, and Imam Shafi'i was born in 150. Anyway, this is not an issue. And Imam Shafi'i passed away in 204. They also said that prior to the period of Imam Shafi'i, or prior to Imam Shafi'i radiallahu ta'ala anhu, there were two separate schools of thought. The school of Ahlul Rai, the people of reason, and they said Imam Abu Hanifa is the head of that school, and the other school is the school of Imam Malik. As you know, Imam Malik died 179, died 179 of Hijrah, and he was living in Medina, where the narrators of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ were living. So he used hadith heavily. And Imam Abu Hanifa was living in Iraq, and because there were many lies that took place, and because of the Khawarij and other sects, so Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala was relying heavily on reason. Now, at that time, they said that those schools, they were exclusive to each other. Then, as Imam Ahmad said, praising Imam al-Shafi'i radiallahu ta'ala anhu, said that we did not know fiqh except when al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala came. There was another statement by Imam Ahmad. He said we did not know umum and khusus, general and specific, except when Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala came. As you know, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal died for 241, and he was one of the students of Imam al-Shafi'i radiyallahu ta'ala anhu. Anyway, so Imam Ahmad was showing the status of Imam al-Shafi'i, and as many other scholars said, that Imam al-Shafi'i was able to look at the principles used by the school of reason, which was led by Imam Abu Hanifa rahimahullah ta'ala, and on the other side the school of text, or the school of hadith, which was led by Imam Malik rahimahullah ta'ala, and he combined between both of them, and he formulated his book of Usul al-Fiqh, Al-Risala, and the other books as well. So he combined between those two methodologies, and he became and he produced a new discipline which is known as Usul al-Fiqh, and that's why many scholars, or you can say the vast majority of scholars, consider him as the founder of Usul al-Fiqh. Now again, as the founder of Usul al-Fiqh as a separate discipline. Otherwise, Usul al-Fiqh as a science itself, as a set of rules and guidelines, have been used by the companions. In fact, as we said, that it has been used by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. Now, Imam Shafi'i wrote his book Al-Risala, Jima' al-Ilm, and other books, and then everyone who wrote in Usul al-Fiqh, they used to refer to Imam al-Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala and what he has wrote. However, we have to say that during that time, the school of thought, the Hanafi school of thought and the reason school of thought was developing as a separate school of thought, and it developed to a stage where they had a special approach of Usul al-Fiqh, and that approach was crystallized by Muhammad al-Imam al-Karhi, who died in 340, and he wrote his first, you can say that the first book of Usul al-Fiqh according to the Hanafis was written by al-Karhi rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in 340, and then after that two different school of thoughts in Usul al-Fiqh was crystallized. The Usul or the school of thought that follows the methodology of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, and the other school of thought that follows the method of people of Ra'i or people of reason, which is known as Tariqat al-Ahnaf. Yeah, the methodology of Imam Shafi'i was known as Tariqat al-Mutakallimin fi Usul al-Fiqh, and the methodology of Imam Abu Hanifa was known as Tariqat al-Ahnaf, and it became two different school of thoughts. And now the school of thought of Imam Shafi'i became the main school of thought in principles of jurisprudence used by not only Shafi'is, but used by Shafi'is, Malikis, and Hanafis. It is the same methodology, and that's why they call it the tariqa of the Jumhur. And then opposite to that tariqa is the tariqa of the Ahnaf, the people of reason, which is followed just by the Ahnaf. However, here I don't want to get into more details at this point about those two different methodologies. I want you to be aware that the tariqa of the Ahnaf is not really as you might expect, that it is just based on reason. In fact, it is totally opposite. Here we are not talking about how to derive the rulings. No, we are not talking about this. We are talking about the discipline itself, how it is crystallized. Okay? How it is crystallized. Not how the rulings are derived, how the individual rulings are derived. No, we are not talking about this. So, the tariqa of the Ahnaf is mainly to refer to all different rulings, all different rulings of different incidents, and then to look at the common denominator between them, and to come up with a conclusion that because the rulings in these incidents were following a certain pattern, then this pattern becomes a ruling itself, or a ruling to derive fiqh rulings from the sources. So this is the tariqa of the Ahnaf. On the other side, the tariqa of mutakallimin, which is the tariqa of al-Jumhur, again, the word mutakallimin should not reflect that they were just using philosophy. No, but it was known as the tariqa of mutakallimin. No need to get into more details why it was known like this. This tariqa is suggesting that Quran and Sunnah, based on the survey of the Arabic language, based on the survey of the text, based on the survey of many other principles, should be understood like this. So they derived certain rulings. So that was the formulation or the period where Usul al-Fiqh was formulated. And as I said, we ended up by two separate schools of thoughts in Usul al-Fiqh. The school of thought of the Mutakallimin or the Jumhur, followed by Shafi'is, Malikis, and Hanabila, and the other method is the method of Ahnaf. And as I said, be careful, don't think that the method of Ahnaf is just based on reason, and don't think that the method of the Mutakallimin is based on philosophy. No. We might explain those two methods later, inshallah. It is not good to dwell into those two methods now, but it is just good to identify that there are books that have been written according to the method of the Jumhur, and there are books that have been written according to the methodology of the Ahnaf. Most of the books that have been written by the Jumhur are mainly those books that have been written by Shafi'i scholars. Yeah? Among the very famous books written in Usul al-Fiqh, Mukhtasar ibn al-Hajib. Mukhtasar ibn al-Hajib was written according to the methodology of Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah. I don't want to get into much history. I think maybe this is enough. Later on we can speak more of the history and the contribution of Imam al-Ghazali in his Mustafa, in his book al-Mustasfa. Imam Ghazali died 505, and they said that his book of al-Mustasfa is the main comprehensive book in the second stage of writing or authoring in Usul al-Fiqh. They also said that most of the Hanabila took from al-Mustasfa. One of the very famous books of Usul al-Fiqh by the Hanabila is Rawdat al-Nadir by Abu Muhammad al-Maqdisi rahimahullah ta'ala, who died in the 7th Hijra century. And they said Rawdat al-Nadir was taken from al-Mustasfa. Anyway, we don't want to get into these much details regarding the history of Usul al-Fiqh, but we need to identify the two school of thoughts. And there is the school of thought that is followed by the Jumhur, and the books of Hanabila are very similar to the books of Shafi'iyya in Usul al-Fiqh. However, on the methodology of writing Usul al-Fiqh, not the conclusions. No, not the conclusions. The Malikis, their tariqah is a little bit different, but at the end of the day, all the three are following certain methodology. And then on the other hand, we have the methodology of the Hanafi school of thought. This will be enough, inshallah, at this particular point. Maybe later on we can dwell into it. Inshallah, in the next episode we will move to another subject. Jazakumullahu khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.